Yeah, Deb, I secured an interview with PPS's Chief of Staff, Jonathan Garcia, for tomorrow. So we do know that PPS has yet to make a decision. Several other school districts are in the same boat. And for many of those districts, it's going to be a challenging choice.
I think what's difficult is serving over 19,000 students. People feel all different ways about this topic.
Oregon's lifting the mask mandate on March 31st, and school districts are feeling the pressure. They'll then have the power to decide whether or not they want to make masking optional. PPS saying Tuesday it hasn't made any decisions yet. On Thursday, the district tweeted that it's committed to keeping schools open and that masking helps keep schools safe. While Gresham-Barlow sent a letter to parents saying it'll follow the state's lead, Salem-Keizer, Beaverton, and Hillsborough are in line with PPS, taking time now to weigh the pros and cons.
There may be unintended consequences that come from a variety of decisions, and we just have a responsibility to try to identify as many of those in advance as we can and try to limit the impact of anything that would be negative for our students, staff, or families along the way.
The teachers union particularly will also likely play a big part in what happens next month.
We definitely need to talk to our labor unions to get a pulse on how our staff feels about this. Obviously, they are expected to be in person every day at our schools.
I can tell you this will likely be interesting at PPS. I have been talking with the Portland Association of Teachers president, that's the union for Portland teachers, and she tells me that there is an agreement in place that says kids will remain masked through the end of the school year. That, of course, can change if both parties agree. In addition to that interview with PPS tomorrow, I'm also trying to secure an interview with the PAT president.
Well, it comes down to academics. He says that he actually does believe that masks are holding some students back. So he says it's time that we start transitioning away from them.
What if you have a question?
We've come a long way in 2 years. From quarantine to masking, distancing, and vaccinations, we're in a different spot than March of 2020.
Are the benefits of face covering in school still outweighing the downsides? And
that's why Washington State Superintendent Chris Reichdahl says we need to start adjusting.
We've got to make this transition from pandemic to endemic, which means we learn to live with this.
And we've made public health decisions that have led the nation.
On Wednesday, Governor Jay Inslee announced he wasn't ready to set a date to drop the mask mandate, but that it was coming.
And today is not the day to lift the mask mandate.
Superintendent Reichdahl says the time is now.
My recommendation is to get going now, and I do think we can accomplish this by the beginning of March.
His biggest concern, if the mask mandate continues much longer, is students.
Some of my worries are academic. There are certainly some students who absolutely need to have visualization of their educator and reflectively the student in learning language or mouth movements or therapies. So there's definitely some populations really disproportionately impacted from masks.
While the governor says he's not ready just yet, he says he does agree with Reichdahl that when the mask mandate is lifted, it must be sweeping, meaning for the whole state. So ultimately, when the mask mandate is lifted in Washington, that will give the power back to counties and public health. They ultimately will be the ones who determine whether or not there needs to be a mask mandate in their county. The governor says he expects to be releasing the date of when he will be getting rid of that mask mandate next week.
Deb, recent polling shows crime continues to be a top priority for a lot of Portlanders, yet addressing that crime, well, many people think city leaders are dragging their feet. I found out one reason could be tied to Portland's antiquated form of government.
Portland's violence problem is a community problem. And people like Maurice Fain want to do more to make our city safer. He works his food truck by day. In his free time, he runs a nonprofit helping young men become entrepreneurs. He's been waiting to hear if he'll get grant funding to help prevent crime. He told me this last month.
It's very important that we get this money by the end of March, because the summer is coming up. And if we don't get ahead of this thing, it's going to get worse.
Last April, the city council acted. They approved an infusion of cash, $4 million, into organizations working directly in communities most impacted by violence. The mayor saying addressing gun violence was Portland's top public safety priority. Commissioner Carmen Rubio saying this moments before the plan passed.
The reality is that this issue demands immediate action.
But months later, $600,000 of the funding is held up in the bureaucracy. Royal Harris is an activist who's been pushing community members and city leaders to slow the shootings.
Are you satisfied with the speed with which this money has gone out?
Yes and no. Yes, if what they're doing is to make sure that they don't make one step forward and then later on have to take two steps back, and these organizations or future organizations have to pay for that, that the due diligence is done, that the money is allocated in the right way. But no, in the sense that this is another example that's indicative of the way our city governance is situated, the way things are allocated, the way things can get bogged down due to politics, that is really inefficient in the way it meets the needs of community.
The months since the ordinance passed have seen no shortage of violence. Police reported at least 70 homicides in the last 10 months. I spoke with City Commissioners Carmen Rubio and Mingus Mapps about the slow rollout.
Are you satisfied with the timeline of the rollout of that plan?
I'm frustrated with the at the pace of which we've moved. Actually implementing programs is much more difficult than kind of thinking of them.
Do you think this process could have been more efficient?
Looking back, we could always be more efficient and find ways to do better. I think what's really important to lift up here is that we didn't have this capacity. This is new capacity that we're adding to the city.
Portland's difficulty in starting new programs could stem from its unique form of government. In this case, it allows city commissioners to decide how the grants go out.
One of the challenges of this form of government, when an issue cuts across the city but only resides in one person's, portfolio, it can be challenging to figure out how and where we support in ways that we can.
Rubio's office seems to have taken a leadership role early on. Emails I received in an open records request show her office set up weekly meetings between council offices and city staff as early as May. The subject of this email, Gun Violence Response Ordinance Weekly Check-In.
We all on council have a very high invested interest in the outcomes of any of the work that we're doing together in this time of challenge.
Commissioner Rubio says council offices got involved at the request of community organizations. However, she tells me no office intended to be so involved. To be clear, most of the grant funding is approved. Almost $1 million in May, another $2 million in 4 separate grants in September. It's the final $600,000 that's just sitting there. The Office of Violence Prevention opened the application process for that funding in October. However, it was quickly shut down for 11 days. A spokesperson for Community Safety Director Mike Myers told me, quote, the Community Safety Division worked with OVP to temporarily retract the announcement and allow the council offices to review the request for application.
Throughout this process, there's been involvement from several city council offices. At times, it seems like that has delayed certain parts of the process. Is this a case of too many cooks in the kitchen getting in the way of city policy?
Doing system change work takes both moving on innovative ideas, and also it takes the time of speed, trust, and capacity building. And that's what we aim to do here. We were not only trying to be responsive to the community, but also making sure that they could count on us getting it right.
Commissioner Mapps, meanwhile, says in hindsight, commissioners should have put more trust in city bureaus to execute the grants and stayed out of the process. People in the community say time is running out to get this right.
We need to get the work done so we can kind of get ahead of it a little bit or catch up to it. And stop all this violence and killing. But when we don't have the resources, it's hard to do the work.
It's still unclear when the city will approve this final round of grants. An email to the applicants said that could come as early as next week.
So, right, it's uncommon to see such broad input from council offices on a specific issue. What's happening here?
Ordinarily, it's one office that's involved, the commissioner in charge of the impacted bureau, once a policy passes city council. Commissioners tell me since gun violence is such a broad issue in Portland, they all have a duty to respond and make sure the city responds properly. Commissioner Hardesty would not sit down for an interview, but her office provided a statement. They tell me basically that she understands there's pressure and urgency on this. However, her focus is on getting it right. She does not want to rush the process and do it wrong. We've got more from Commissioner Hardesty as well as Commissioners Rubio and Maps on K2.com. I've sent some of the same questions to Mayor Ted Wheeler really for the past several weeks. We are yet to hear back. His office tells me they will give us some answers soon. I've also reached out to Commissioner Dan Ryan. We've not heard back.